con nuestra actividad. Les solicitamos dejar en silencio sus celulares. Muy buenas tardes, mi nombre es Daniela Pellegrin, estudiante de doctorado, y a nombre de la Facultad de Educación de la Universidad Católica les damos una cordial bienvenida a todos y todas los que hoy nos pueden acompañar en este seminario titulado Praxis-Oriented, Pedagogy and the Development of L2 Novice Teacher Reasoning. Saludamos también a los y las participantes que hoy se encuentran conectados vía streaming a través del canal oficial de YouTube de la Facultad de Educación de la Universidad Católica. Esta actividad está enmarcada en el proyecto Fondesit regular número 1210867 y tiene como objetivo dialogar y conversar sobre el desarrollo del razonamiento pedagógico en los profesores de inglés y la pedagogía basada en la praxis. El razonamiento pedagógico es fundamental para desarrollar prácticas de enseñanza informadas. Saludamos cordialmente al decano de nuestra Facultad de Educación, el señor Alejandro Carrasco. Asimismo, y de manera especial, damos la bienvenida a nuestra invitada internacional, quien por motivos de fuerza mayor no pudo estar presencialmente hoy con nosotros, pero sí de manera virtual. Saludamos a la profesora Karen Johnson, quien nos acompaña de manera remota en esta instancia. La profesora Johnson es profesora de aprendizaje de lenguas y lingüística aplicada en la Universidad del Estado de Pensilvania. Ella es una reconocida investigadora en formación de profesores de segunda lengua y ha dedicado su carrera a construir teoría y realizar investigación sobre la cognición y prácticas docentes de segunda lengua desde una perspectiva sociocultural. También saludamos a la profesora Malva Barahona, investigadora responsable del proyecto Fondesit que nos convoca, y Stephen Darwin, co-investigador del proyecto y académico de la Universidad Alberto Hurtado. A continuación, y para entregarnos unas palabras de bienvenida, invito a pasar adelante al decano de nuestra Facultad de Educación, el señor Alejandro Carrasco. Bienvenido, decano.
Muchas gracias. Qué bueno que se sentaron hacia adelante, porque siempre la gente se sienta atrás y uno la invita, sobre todo porque hace frío, ¿cierto? Bueno, les doy la bienvenida. Me invitó Malva a que les diera un mensaje de bienvenida y me gustaría aprovechar la oportunidad para decir dos cosas. La primera es felicitar a Malva por este proyecto Fondesit. Siempre que tengo la oportunidad, lo digo, expresar siempre la gratitud a que tenemos en este país financiamiento para hacer investigación y no hay que perder la perspectiva. En otros países de Latinoamérica eso no existe y además en Chile es crecientemente competitivo y entonces uno tiene que ser muy agradecido de eso. Y además y es financiamiento no solo en múltiples disciplinas, en particular en educación y más en particular en subdisciplinas dentro de la educación y en este caso en particular en inglés, en la enseñanza de un idioma extranjero. Entonces este seminario que además se está transmitiendo, ¿cierto? Entonces saludar a los que están en la transmisión que quisieron evitar el frío y no venir hasta acá. Entonces, agradecer eso y felicitar a Malva porque se lo adjudicó, lo desarrolló y lo va a terminar. Entonces, felicitar eso y darle la bienvenida a todos ustedes esta tarde, que también sé que son no solo, por supuesto, en nuestra facultad, también quienes enseñan en otras universidades y forman profesores y profesoras y que tienen además la pedagogía en inglés en otras universidades y darles la bienvenida. Y este es mi segundo punto, y esto es más de mi cosecha, Malva, y que tiene que ver con la desigualdad educativa, que es algo que a nosotros en general en educación nos importa, nos motiva en esta facultad, en nuestros centros, nos preocupa mucho. El idioma inglés es una competencia importantísima que hace la diferencia, conecta con oportunidades globales y en la enseñanza del idioma inglés tenemos una desigualdad educativa muy profunda. En los 90 se hizo obligatoria la enseñanza de este idioma, pero su puesta en práctica ha dejado ver brechas muy importantes. Siempre una manera de poder observar el CIMSE 2018, lo que arroja, quizás lo que ya sabemos, pero es bueno constatarlo, el 85% de los estudiantes de nivel socioeconómico alto tenía un desempeño intermedio, que es interesante, no alto. Pero bueno, el nivel socioeconómico alto, que es más o menos el 7% de la matrícula, digamos que el 1 o 2% son colegios bilingües en inglés, entonces eso lo explica un poco. Pero solo el 9% tenía un desempeño intermedio en el nivel socioeconómico bajo. Y esa es una brecha muy grande. Y esas son las brechas con las que egresan del sistema escolar nuestros estudiantes. Por eso, y los factores explicativos están en contar o no con profesores de inglés y además con la formación que tuvieron y la calidad de la formación que tuvieron esos profesores y profesoras de inglés. Por eso, cada uno en esto tiene sus responsabilidades. Por supuesto que el sistema escolar es contar con esos profesores, pero nosotros, instituciones formadoras, es formar buenos profesores y profesoras en inglés para aportar a reducir esas brechas, que se ve un camino largo, pero ese es nuestro importante terrón de arena, creo yo. Así que lo que ustedes hacen, a lo que se dedican, es muy clave, es muy importante y, insisto, lo que decía al principio, es una habilidad elemental que hace la diferencia en términos de oportunidades. Entonces, el trabajo, la labor que hacen me parece muy, muy, muy crucial. Por eso nuestra pedagogía en inglés es importante, la valoramos mucho en esta universidad, pero también, y con esto termino, creemos que como facultad, como universidad, creemos que la profesión docente en general y la formación en disciplinas particulares como el inglés es algo sistémico, requiere el trabajo colaborativo y por lo tanto este seminario y el trabajo en red con otras instituciones formadoras en la enseñanza del inglés es muy clave, muy importante. Entonces, por eso felicitar a Malva en este seminario, su proyecto. Y cierro, no me está entendiendo nada, obviamente. Karen Johnson, me acabo de dar cuenta. Pero agradecer que ella nos dé esta charla esta tarde y a Malva por haberlo intencionado. Muchas gracias.
Bien, agradecemos al decano por sus palabras. Antes de continuar con nuestra actividad, quisiera recordarles que pueden formular sus preguntas por escrito en inglés o en español, las cuales serán recogidas por nuestros asistentes, Juan y Carla y Maca. Y también podrán hacer sus preguntas vía stream también. Estas preguntas serán al final respondidas en nuestro panel de discusión. Para continuar, invitamos a la profesora Malva, quien introducirá el tema de este seminario. Desde este momento, el seminario continuará en inglés.
Hola, buenas tardes. Muchas gracias por venir a este seminario. Thank you very much for coming. Thank you, Karen, for joining us. And I have to tell everyone that actually she tried to come twice, 3 times, and it was not possible. Tropical storms impeded her to fly to Santiago. So I know, well, she will tell you afterwards, but I think it's important to tell you what happened. Anyway, she insisted in participating through Zoom, as we will do today. Yep. So, well, it's a privilege to be here today to discuss some key findings from my project investigating it's such a long name. Now I have regretted so much the name of this. Anyway, so as I was saying, it's a privilege to actually share with you some of findings of the project investigating the development of professional pedagogical responsibility of English language student teachers, and of course to explore the connection with praxis-oriented pedagogy. We're going to delve into the complexities and potentials of teacher education, and I want to share some of the insights from our research, particularly focusing on the critical role of teacher educators in preparing future English language teachers. As you could see, the title of my fondasit, very long, apart from being long, focuses a lot on student teachers. So yes, it's true. This project, 4-year project, this is the last year of the project. However, half of the project I have devoted it to how teacher educators mediate teacher learning. And why is that? Because actually this is the sort of a pending task, something that in the literature we know very little. What is it that teacher educators do? We focus on the curriculum. We focus on pre-service teachers' beliefs. We focus on self-efficacy. We focus on so many things related to context, learning conditions, but not on who the teacher educators are, what they do, and how they can improve their practices to improve teacher education. So half of my fondasit has to do with that, and this is what I'm going to talk a bit today. And I'm very happy that some participants of this project are here today. And I hope we can discuss some of the findings that I haven't actually discussed with them yet. Well, this is always a bit challenging, and I feel a bit, a bit insecure about it. As I said, the focus of this presentation, it has to do with the challenges of faced by English language teacher educators in Chile. And I'm going to focus specifically on some publications that are going to be in the public very soon. I'm very happy, and that's why I put it here. We wrote a chapter with my colleagues from the program, Pedagogía en Inglés para Enseñanza Básica para Enseñanza Media, from this university. And these are tutors that work here, and we wrote a chapter in one book that is coming next year, actually edited by Karen Johnson. So, and we presented this work in a recent conference. But also, now we also published, it's going to be published soon, hopefully, fingers crossed, another paper which actually is about teacher educator practices, So you might be wondering, what the hell with teacher responsibility and praxis-oriented pedagogy and the challenges of teacher educators? Well, I'm going to start. Our study, I'm not going to do a presentation in which we do context, research question, outcomes, etc. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to just give you flavor of some of the issues we have found, so then you're going to be so willing to read the papers that that's the key. No, actually, it's so that Karen has the time to actually develop the topic of praxis-oriented pedagogy in length. So I'm just framing this. So what is it that we have found? We have found that English language teacher educators in Chile face, as you can imagine, a complex landscape of challenges and contradictions. We have found that despite saying, reporting, espousing, advocating for student-centered, dialogic practice approaches, many teacher educators predominantly employ directive teaching methods, like lecturing and explanation. This contradiction between beliefs and practices reflects broader tensions in TESOL teacher education globally. So it's not an issue that happens solely in Chile. No, not at all. We have read a bit, and actually that happens in many places around the world. So one key finding is a significant impact of systemic factors on teachers' educators' ability to enact their idealized practices. So on one hand, this is something I have to say, there is an idealization of practices, yeah, that they report. I'm saying that they are idealized. Heavy workloads, precarious employment conditions, and institutional pressures often constrain the innovative, critical, and reflective pedagogical approaches that teacher educators aspire to implement. So there is a lot of aspiration here, a lot of wanting to do. Yeah? This highlights the need for more nuanced approaches in teacher education and support that consider these complex realities. Now, in terms of language, and this is something that teacher educators can understand and can relate well, we have also identified tensions surrounding language use in the classroom. And we're talking about university classrooms. We're not talking about school classrooms. We're talking about classrooms in which teacher educators are being prepared. Yeah? So there is a tension there, particularly about the expectation of English-only instruction versus the practical reality of translanguaging and code switching. Why do I say practical reality? Well, because we live in Chile, most of our students and teachers speak Spanish, English is our second or third language, so we come into the classroom, we switch into English, but lots of things happen in Spanish no matter what we do. It continues happening. So that's why I say kind of the practical reality. However, in many programs, there is an expectation of English only, no matter what. So this reflects the broader debates in TESOL, in EFL context, about optimal, sort of the good language practices, and highlights the need for a nuanced understanding of language choices in multilingual educational contexts. So we used to think that Chile was a monocultural and monolingual place. Yeah? Now we know that that's not true. It's being sown even in the places that we think, come on, we don't have more people, we don't have migrants here. If I start asking you where your parents, grandparents come from, which languages they speak, we're going to find a variety and a range of languages and cultures. And that somehow is denied and neglected in our classrooms. Our research has also highlighted the struggle teacher educators face in balancing the development of technical language teaching skills with fostering critical and creative professional dispositions in our students, in future teachers. Here I'm referring to, technical skills in the sense that what teachers should be able to know and do from English language teaching perspective, like knowing different methods, being able to articulate lesson plans in certain ways, implementing different high-leverage teaching practices, etc. Yeah? So this tension between institutional norms or standards, even national norms, for forming capable language educators and the desire to ensure holistic development of future teachers is a crucial area for further exploration and improvement in our field. We know very little about that. So there is an invitation as well to continue working in those areas. So now I'm getting to praxis-oriented pedagogy. So all what I told you about kind of teacher educators has made me go and explore further of what is it that we're doing, how we teach future teachers. And that's how I got into praxis-oriented pedagogy. However, I've been working under the framework of social cultural perspective for quite a long since I did my PhD. So Karen Johnson is not someone that I knew last year. I have been reading and studying her work for a long time. So, and now she has developed this pedagogy that she will talk a bit further. However, I want to introduce a bit about this, about what is it, what is praxis-oriented pedagogy, and the connection with our research. The findings of the research I was telling you about have reinforced the importance of this pedagogy, praxis-oriented pedagogy in teacher education. Why? Because as conceptualized by Karen Johnson and others, it's a transformative approach to teacher education, deeply rooted in Vygotskian social cultural theory. This framework reimagines the preparation of language teachers by seamlessly interweaving theory and practice. At its core, it views teaching as a dynamic, dialogic process where knowledge is co-constructed through meaningful interactions between educators and learners. Also, we have to think about we educators are also learners, yeah? So then it's also kind of a learning experience. However, from a Vygotsky perspective, the educators play a crucial role in mediation, in going into the next stage, yeah? When we talk about zone of proximal development, helping our future teachers, our student teachers to go to the next stage, that's part of what we do. So from this perspective, teacher educators create carefully structured mediational spaces, environments designed to nurture growth and experimentation. These spaces allow pre-service teachers to step into the role of a teacher, testing and refining their skills in low-stakes scenarios, what we do in our classrooms, in our workshops, yeah, before actually getting into the real classroom, into the real school classrooms. Central to this process is the use of specific pedagogical concepts that serve as powerful mediational tools, guiding pre-service teachers as they evolve from teacher-centered instructional stances towards more student-centered responsive approaches. And here I know, and you know this much better than I do, when pre-service teachers start doing the thing, it's all about themselves. It's all about who they are and am I doing it all right all the time? Yeah, can I do this or can I do that? So our role is to help them to move from them to actually the learning process and to their learners. Reflection is a cornerstone of praxis-oriented pedagogy. Pre-service teachers are consistently encouraged to critically examine their instructional choices, developing a deeper understanding of the why behind their actions. It's not just doing something, it's to know why they are doing it. So this reflective practice is supported by responsive mediation from teacher educators, from us. We should do the responsive mediation. And teacher educators who offer tailored guidance that addresses the immediate needs and potential growth of pre-service teachers. So from my understanding, and then Karen can actually confirm or say something different about the aim of praxis-oriented pedagogy, is to cultivate educators who can seamlessly blend theoretical knowledge with practical skills, developing pedagogical reasoning abilities. So from that point of view, it aims to transform cognitive processes, moving pre-service teachers from reliance on external guidance to internal autonomous control over their teaching practices. In essence, praxis-oriented pedagogy strives to produce not just competent teachers, but reflective, adaptable practitioners capable of navigating the complex relational nature of language teaching in diverse contexts. That slide had a lot. Now I'm sure it doesn't have. So we talked about praxis-oriented pedagogy, and now I'm going to make the connection with this idea of professional pedagogical responsibility. By emphasizing on the development of professional pedagogical responsibility, I advocate for a model of teacher education that integrates reflective practice and dialogic engagement. So this approach encourages pre-service teachers to develop a strong sense of agency, enabling them to navigate the complexities of teaching with confidence and adaptability. That's key here. It's not just being able to act, but having the confidence to act and to adapt to difficult and complex scenarios. Nowadays, teaching, yes, it is complex. It has never been easy, but the idea of being flexible and adaptable to different contexts is key, and that's part of being agentic. So as we continue to explore the development of professional pedagogical responsibility, we're committed to advancing our understanding of how praxis-oriented pedagogy can transform teacher education. By fostering an environment where pre-service teachers can engage in meaningful dialogue, reflect on their practices, and develop a strong sense of agency. We believe we can cultivate a new generation of educators who are not only skilled, but also deeply committed to their students' learning. Our research underscores the need for systemic changes to support effective teacher education. This includes addressing working conditions, providing opportunities for continuous professional development, and creating more coherent and satisfying learning environments for both teacher educators and, of course, pre-service teachers. So, as to conclude my part, it's funny, when you are sort of finishing a fantasy project, you're already thinking about the next one. Yeah? Not only because of funding, because this is how the game works, that you have to, it's a machine in the end. Also, as I was saying, half of my project has been on teacher educator and teacher educator practices. And these originated after doing a lot of things related, but not getting into kind of teacher educators. And that's the thing, how we continue now, and that's what's coming, yeah? So, to go further and look at kind of impact and effect of praxis-oriented pedagogy, that's something I would like to work on with, of course, teacher educators, and again, and continue with the idea of developing agency. That's what I would like to do. So, to finish my part now. I'm excited now to hear from Karen Johnson, and she will get into praxis-oriented pedagogy much better. Of course, she has developed this framework. And well, thank you for your attention, and I look forward to continue discussing about these topics.
Well, we thank Malva for this very interesting introduction. Now, with no further ado, I'm delighted to introduce our keynote speaker, Professor Karen Johnson, KB Professor of Language Learning and Applied Linguistics at the Pennsylvania State University. Professor Johnson's research has significantly contributed to our understanding of L2 teacher learning and practice. Grounded in a Vygotskian sociocultural theory of mind, her scholarship centers on understanding the learning of L2 teaching, the activity of L2 teaching, and the practices of L2 teacher education. She has accomplished this by empirically documenting the dialogic mediation that emerges inside the practices of L2 teacher education, tracing L2 teacher development, as it's unfolding, and detailing the consequences of these interactions in the ways in which L2 teachers begin to think about and attempt to enact their instructional practices with L2 students in the socially situated institutions in which they live and work. Additionally, she has argued that the transformative power of teachers engaging in narrative activities lies in its ability to ignite cognitive processes that can foster L2 teacher professional development, and as a result, is critical to the design, enactment, and assessment of the consequences of L2 teacher education. She has published 9 scholarly books, the most recent being Praxis-Oriented Pedagogy for Novice L2 Teacher, Developing Teacher Reasoning. Please join me in welcoming Professor Karen Johnson.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. All right. Thank you. I can't tell you how disappointed I am that I am not there with you right now. I really tried. On Sunday, it was a hurricane going across Florida. Yesterday, it was storms in Pennsylvania and Philadelphia, and flights were canceled. And we had to sit on the tarmac for 2 hours waiting to basically return back to the terminal. So it was pretty frustrating, but I'm glad at least I can be here with you today. And I want to thank Malva for inviting me and all the hassle that has gone on in the last week as we've tried to work around these travel problems. But anyway, I'm here and I'm happy to be here. And I thank Malva for that introduction, because What I'm going to talk about today is very similar to what she's doing with her teachers. And she mentioned a book chapter that they co-authored with her that will be coming out in 2025. And it is very much showing how teachers can do research on themselves to make changes in what they do. And that's sort of the whole orientation of praxis-oriented pedagogy. So to get started, I'm going to share my screen, and hopefully everyone will be able to see that. And if you could just give me a heads up if you can see what I see. Great. Okay, wonderful. So as I said, the orientation that I have is a praxis-oriented pedagogy, and just like Malva was talking about the development of teacher educators reasoning, I have been for many years now looking at how teacher educators influence novice teacher reasoning. And so in the same way that Malva and her teachers are studying their own practices, my colleague, Darren Verde and Sharon Childs and I, we all work at Penn State, and we have offered these 3 courses as part of our MA TESOL program. And for many years, all 3 of us have an orientation in Vygotsky and social cultural theory. And for many years, we sort of had our practices, did our courses, and we decided about 4 or 5 years ago that we would actually study our own practices that are informed by Vygotsky and social cultural theory, and then trace the development of teacher learning over a 2-year period. So we had 27 teachers who participated in this project over 4 years. And essentially, we asked them to give us access to everything they did in each one of these classes. The first class being teaching ESL, which is sort of a basic methodology class, a tutoring internship where they work with second language writers at Penn State, undergraduate students, and help them with their academic writing. And then the practicum, which is your typical student teaching experience where they're placed with a mentor teacher. And for us, what we wanted to do was to look at how our teachers experienced these 3 courses and the development of their reasoning. But we were also interested in the kind of mediation that we as teacher educators provided for these teachers to see what sort of impact that had on the way their development unfolded over the 2 years that they were with us. Now, I just want to make a couple of comments about sociocultural theory. I won't go into extensive details of the theory, but one of the things that I find most compelling about Vygotsky and sociocultural theory is that, as you know, he was a Marxist. He believed that you don't do research to describe the world, you do research to change the world. And in his mind, it was in revolutionary ways. But again, the theory is not a lens for just observing teaching, but it's a means of actually making learning happen. And that's a real distinction between this theory and other psychological theories that influence education. In essence, what we tried to do is to create educational innovations, innovative kinds of practices that were based on the principles of Vygotsky and sociocultural theory. Because the theory argues that if you change social activity or social relations, that changes cognition. And that's what we wanted to accomplish with our teachers. We wanted them to think differently. We wanted them to act differently. We wanted them to, as Malva just said, move from this sort of teacher-fronted instruction to more dialogic mediation with their students. And so what I'm going to show you today are what we call cohesively structured, intentionally designed mediational spaces. They're basically structures we have set up in each one of these classes that is designed to help teachers change the way they think and the way that they engage in teaching, and as Malva said, the way they reason about their teaching. And of course, that brings us to the theory practice dialectic, which Vygotsky wrote about a lot. But it's essentially that theory informs practice, but practice also informs theory, and that they are in a dialectic relationship. And for much of the professional teacher education world, we have theory on one side and practice on the other. And this sort of model or this theory is an attempt to bring those two together. So before I do that, though, let me sort of start at the beginning. Vygotsky believed very strongly that history is very important. History is what creates culture. Culture is what creates the human mind. And so this is an activity I do with my teachers at the very beginning of the MA program. So the very first class, the very first day they come, I ask them to draw 2 visual depictions. So one is of the typical language teacher that they've had, and the other is what kind of language teacher do they want to be? And I view these as sort of the apprenticeship of observation. So this is their experience, the typical language teacher. And this is then the teacher that they want to be. And I've been doing this project probably, I don't know, for at least 20 years. And the images are always very similar. For the typical language teacher, you tend to find teacher-fronted instruction. Students are not really differentiated. Information is sort of one way. If you look at the drawings that they do of the kind of teacher that they want to be, they're almost always in some kind of circle. They're facing each other. There's communication that's happening both ways. They're different from each other. So you see that they're not just sort of these faceless blobs that are in the classroom, but they're actual people with personalities and histories and experiences. And these drawings, to me, is the lived experience of the typical teacher, and then the ideal. That's the kind of teacher that they want to be. And unfortunately, most of the novice teachers who enter our program have no idea how to create this kind of environment. They can put their students in a circle, but that doesn't mean they're going to create this kind of ideal environment that they want. So this is really the goal of what we're trying to do in our teacher education program. Now, how do we do that? Well, we do that in lots of ways, but the way that I'm going to talk about it today are what we call pedagogical concepts. And these are concepts that my colleague Darren and Sharon and I have developed over a long period in our professional careers. And they're pedagogical concepts, we call them this because they are about how to teach rather than what to teach. So you're going to see concepts that come up in this presentation that are not about what they're teaching, which might be transitions in academic writing, or it might be ethos, pathos, logos in argumentative essays. That we assume that they have a deep conceptual understanding of what they're teaching, and they get that through their other classes and through their experiences in developing lesson plans and teaching. But what we're focused on is how do you teach? How do you teach in a way that is going to be dialogic? And we refer to these as scientific concepts that we package for novices. So they seem really simple, but they really reflect sort of a science of pedagogy. And the 3 that I have up here today are actually ones that came up over and over again in this group of teachers that I'm going to be showing you. I'm going to show you some videos of them practicing their teaching, actually teaching, and also tutoring. The first one, teach off your students, not at them, is a sort of play on a preposition, but it has to do with instructional stance. So instead of teaching at your students, and you can see my gesture hopefully in the Zoom frame, it's teaching off them. So you have to get something from your students to figure out how they're making sense of what you're doing so that you can teach off them. And this has become a pedagogical concept that is easy to grasp, but not easy for novice teachers to accomplish. The second one, be direct, not directive, has to do mostly with a tutoring program that they're involved in, the tutoring internship. The idea being that when you tutor a writer in a writing center, they often come in with a paper and they put it in front of you and they say, can you fix it? And the idea is that you want to be direct, you want to help them do what they need to do, but you don't want to do it for them. And so this notion of being direct, what is the issue you're struggling with in your writing, but I'm not going to do it for you, I'm going to help you work through it and help you understand what it is you need to do to be able to be a better writer. And then the last one, teaching is connecting. This has a couple of levels to it. There's the teaching of connecting is just connecting to your students. Who are they? What are their histories? What are their experiences? What are they interested in? What are they struggling with? But also connecting to their lives and what they're going to be using, the content that you're teaching, and also then connecting to, what is the role of this practicum experience that they're having as teacher educators or as novice teachers. So we're going to be talking about these pedagogical concepts. So I'll start off here first with the teaching ESL class. That's what I said is the sort of basic methodology class. And the structured mediational space we have in that class is a project called the Extended Team Teaching Project. It takes about 5 to 6 weeks to, actually more than that, probably 7 to 8 weeks to actually complete this project. But in a sense, it's taking small groups of teachers, 2, 3, maybe 4 if we have a large class size, and having them actually teach a lesson to ESL learners at Penn State. But we don't just put them in the classroom and say, go teach this lesson. We do a variety of structured mediational spaces or activities with them. So the first thing they do is they get assigned to this course. They go in and they observe. They watch the mentor teacher teach the course. Then they have to create a lesson plan. And whatever is on the syllabus for the day that they're going to go in and teach, that's what they have to teach. And this actually creates problems for our pre-service teachers because sometimes they don't really know the content that they're expected to teach. So they have to learn it first, which is a common thing that happens with new teachers is they have to learn the content before they can teach it. Once they've created a lesson plan and there's a lot of assistance that's provided by the instructor, they then do a practice teach. And a practice teach is basically they are teaching to their peers. And I'm going to show you a couple of video clips of what the practice teach is like. It's not a teaching simulation in the sense of get up, give a lesson, and then sit back down. It's more of let's co-construct this lesson together. And then you get a chance to replan, and then you get a chance to actually teach it in front of ESL students. After they have taught the lesson, which I'm also going to show you some images of, they do a simulated recall session, which basically they sit and watch a video of themselves teaching this lesson, and they have a conversation about it, including I'm the instructor of this course, with lots of mediation that goes on. And then the project ends with a reflection paper where they, it's a 5 to 7 page reflection paper in which they describe what did they learn by going through this whole process? What do they now know about teaching that they didn't know before? What do they know about ESL that they didn't know before? And it's really focusing on their learning. So this is a video clip that I'm going to show you that is from a practice teach. These 3 teachers that I'll introduce to you, you're going to see throughout the 3 courses. So the young woman from China in the white top is Dina. Trevor is in the blue and orange shirt, and Sage is turned around at the board. She's writing on the board. And we're gonna trace these people over the 2-year period that they were in the program. They are teaching to their peers. So this is the ESL class that they're in. And the day that they were going to go teach the lesson in the actual ESL classroom, which, by the way, is a freshman composition course. So it's first year undergraduates who are second language speakers of English are learning to write academic English, basically. And their topic was about transitions. How do we use transitions in academic writing? They had 3 types that they were presenting, a pronoun reference, a repeated keyword, or your traditional transition words. And in this clip, what you're going to see is that they picked content that they wanted the class to look at, and they asked them to find the use of transitions in that content. And so they had a very simple example. It was something about Uncle Bob going to the store, and he did, and so that would be the pronoun reference. And then they gave them a really complicated reading to go through and
Okay, apparently Professor Karen Johnson is having some connectivity issues. We're going to wait for a couple of minutes to see if we can reconnect with her. Apparently it's a storm. Storm weather. That's me. Yeah, we will try to get hold of her again, see if she can reconnect. in the meantime, we're going to be collecting questions. So if you have any questions, it's a good time for you to write it. Same goes for people that's connecting via YouTube. So if there's some questions, one of us will be collecting them so that we can discuss them in the panel at the end. Karen?
Okay, I'm back. Not sure what happened.
Okay.
I will continue where I was. I'm going to go back to sharing my screen. My apologies.
Okay.
All right. Hopefully you can see this. Not sure where we were in this video, but I will. I'll bring it forward a little bit here.
I think the other difficulty is where'd you get this paragraph? In their text. It's in their textbook. Is this a topic they've been talking about? Like insect populations and insect problems and stuff? Okay. So because the reason that there's a bunch of things that I'm having cognitive overload. One is just what is the thing about? And Cassie was reading it, and Cassie was struggling to read it because it's very dense. It sounds like it comes from a science textbook. And that would be fine if they were familiar with this topic and they've been talking about this topic, and the previous examples about Uncle John or Uncle Bob or whoever was about this. But those previous examples were so simple and so easy, and this is so complicated. Part of it's because of the content. Part of it is because it's just not so obvious what they are. So you either need to make your easy examples more complicated, or you need to have this paragraph that you use for the first attempt at it to be a simpler paragraph. And then maybe you move into something that's more complicated. But this is like a huge, from Uncle John's shop to primitive agricultural conditions. I mean, it's like a huge jump, right? You see, and I think what you were hearing was their struggle with what is this about and what am I supposed to do?
Okay, so in this clip, I'm sorry about the breakup there. Basically, what's happening is I'm trying to get them to understand their students' thinking. So why were the students struggling, and what might be some options that they could do to help the ESL students be able to find these types of transition words. So you can see this. There's a lot of in-the-moment mediation that goes on during this practice teach. It's not just them teaching, it's me stopping, and the other students also say things, and there's a lot of mediation that goes on there. So selecting appropriate content became one issue.
I think
the other has to do with making this content accessible, and I'll show you this clip just because what it suggests is I give them suggestions for how they can make the content accessible to the students. Let me just play this one.
I mean, it sounds like it comes from the GRE. And so if I haven't been talking about what that content is about, I have to really process that. I had to really think while Cassie was reading what that was about. So then on top of that, figure out what kind of pronoun reference is being used that I just learned a second ago is too difficult. You see?
Like maybe change these examples and maybe them equal to the other one if you have to use that for this one as well. Right.
Or take this and make an easy one about Uncle John's and Bob's, and then have a harder one. So you progressively get more difficult and more difficult. And another thing you could do is you could, for the paragraph that follows this, examples are already marked, right? So you do Uncle Bob, or I'm sorry, Uncle John, but then you go to the next one, which is insight, whatever, and they're already marked there. Yeah, they're already marked. It's like, okay, all I have to do is read this. Oh, I see what they're. Now I get another paragraph. Oh, they're already marked. Now here's the third paragraph. You guys mark. You see what I'm saying? So you're progressively working them through the process, and each time the paragraph gets more complicated, more complicated. That's another way you can think about doing it.
Okay. So, so as you can see there, I'm giving them lots of suggestions about how they could potentially make this content more relevant. So this, these little data sets here come from their final reflection papers, and they're talking about after the practice teach, how they had to replan the lesson. And so you can see in Dina, she says, we focused more on selecting appropriate articles and designing meaningful activities. We paid more attention to students' needs. So again, they're shifting their focus to what is it that the students need. Sage says, I need to spend more time on the front end pondering my rationale for my decisions, which of course is part of praxis-oriented pedagogy. I would be better able to explain what I was trying to do. So she has to think about the reasoning behind that. Trevor said, we also pay more attention to the selection and design of content activities. Obviously, that was the kind of mediation they received. To make our whole layout of the lesson more logical, we tried to make each activity to be connected by adding some rationale to the activities and arranging the activities in a logical learning and acquiring sequence. So you can see they were having to think about how to make this lesson more appropriate and more accessible to the students they were going to teach. Now, this is not a video, it's just a screenshot, but this is them actually teaching the ESL class. And they did a couple things here. One of the things that they did was they got rid of that complicated science paragraph that they had found. And they asked the mentor teacher, the instructor of the course, for examples from previous classes that she had taught. So right there, what you have is content that's accessible because it's freshman composition writing. It's not anything that they have to have specialized knowledge about. So that really helped. The second thing that they did is you can see, if you can see the PowerPoint there, they've color-coded the examples of the different kinds of transitions, and they've asked them to talk about what type of transition it is. And then, importantly, what they did was they asked the students, well, why? Why did you use this particular pronoun or this particular transition, or what was the writer trying to accomplish by doing this? And this was key because it not only helped the students know what appropriate transitions are in academic writing, but why would a writer use them in the first place? And so it really became this very, very successful lesson with the students then having to look at their own papers that they were writing. I think they did a peer conference where they swapped papers and they asked the students to find evidence of transitions in their peers and then ask them why, and was this the most appropriate one to use. So you'll see here in this again comes from their final reflection paper, but there's a real shift in their stance. They move from this teacher-fronted to a more what we call teaching as dialogic mediation. It's more dialogic, more interactive, more engaging. So Dina says, to be a qualified teacher, I have to explain the reason why I chose this class material and why I designed the activity. Before the practice teach, what concerned me most was how to teach, how to deliver. After the practice teach, what plays the main role during my teaching is to think from both the teacher's perspective and the student's needs. So you really see a shift in the way she's orienting to what it means to teach. Sage says something similar. My conception of teaching was very much presentation focused. An explanation of core concepts. It's harder than I anticipated to assess in the moment the effectiveness of my explanations. I was still looking for some kind of indication that the students understood the directions and connection to the topic. So she's really making a shift here in terms of the way she's thinking about what she does as a teacher. Trevor's comment was really cute because he said, I have been a passive recipient in English for a very long time. Since I intensively learned English in China, I absorbed the knowledge of English like a sponge. However, I never tried to squeeze myself to transmit the knowledge that I learned to other people. In hindsight, I totally changed my stance from an ESL learner to an ESL teacher. So you see this real shift in their orientation. Now, this is only based on one lesson that they've taught in this extended team teaching project. And in a few minutes, I'm going to be showing you when they do their internship, their practicum, and how you see that in their activity. This is them sort of talking about it. Again, shift in identity from being a learner to being a teacher. I tried to change my stance from a student to an English teacher. Instead of sitting and learning, I was standing and teaching. So you really see this shift in the way they position themselves in their identity. Dina says, I tried to tell from each student's face whether the student could understand or not. So really focusing less on themselves and more on the students. Sage says, this project has given me an entire month of pondering how I want to teach and why, how I actually do teach, and how I can learn from my experience to bring the reality even closer to the ideal. Trevor also says, it is technically the first time that I tried to figure out how to transmit my knowledge to the students rather than just internalize the knowledge. So really shifting from a learner to a teacher. So that's the first class that they take, and that's the structured mediational space that they engage with for that first semester. In the second or third semester, depending on when they're scheduled to do the tutoring internship, they are assigned to tutor 3 students from our ESL composition program. We have a very large ESL population at Penn State. There's probably 90 sections of this class. And we set them up with students who basically say, I feel like I could really use some help with my writing. And they meet for tutoring sessions for 12 weeks, about 7 hours per tutee. And they write reflective posts. Basically, here's what I did, and here's what's happening, or here's how I'm feeling. And it's about every tutoring session, so it's a lot of data that they have. And then the instructor, who was Darren Verde, was a co-author of this book, responds to every single reflective post. So you can imagine how much text we have here. We not only have how they're experiencing the internship, but also how the instructor is mediating the experience that they're having. And here, unfortunately, I don't have any video to show you, but I'm going to show you a lot of the text that comes from their reflective posts and what the instructor said. So the interesting thing about the tutoring is that it's, we want them to use these pedagogical concepts: teach off your students, not at them, be direct, not directive, teaching as connecting. But it's challenging for them because it's real teaching. There's nobody there helping them. There's no lesson plan. There's no grade that's given. They don't have to evaluate. And there's no classroom management issues. They're basically sitting with one student and they're working with that student in whatever the student brings in for the tutoring session. So there's no practice teach. Every time it's real. The mediation that they receive, unlike what you saw in the videos that I just showed you, it's delayed because it's written. So they write about their experience and then the instructor writes back. The experience that they have with the student is very unpredictable because it's face-to-face and they're real students. And because they're tutoring them over the course of 15 weeks, they really need to develop a long-term instructional role. They have to figure out who this student is and how they can engage with the student. And these are some of the challenges that the teachers have as they do this tutoring internship. So in teaching as connecting, this is where the very first meeting is really important for them. So in Trevor's first post, he said, he honing his introduction, he says, I wanted him to know, that I was really well prepared for the first meeting. But when he came into the room to sit down beside me, I found my mind became a blank as a white paper, which all of the words I'd written down just disappeared suddenly. So in tutoring sessions, you can't script out what you're going to say. You have to sort of go with the flow and get to know this person. And that was a struggle for Trevor in the beginning. Dina, on the other hand, had a very different experience. So at the end of the session, her tutee showed great interest in her tutoring, which made me delighted. So the tutors have very different experiences with connecting with their students. Teach off your students, not at them. This is this is a pedagogical concept that we emphasize, that comes up a lot. Trevor says, however, I did not figure out what should I react when I have no idea about the topic. Maybe I need to encourage tutees to express more ideas so that I could give more effective feedback according to their ideas. So he's really struggling with I don't know anything about this topic the student's writing about. How do I help them? How do I give them effective ideas? What if the tutee doesn't know how to conceptualize her ideas? So he's really, and this is week 7, so he's still really struggling with this. How do I teach off my students, not at them? And Sage says, how can I shift my own attitude so that when I encounter work that seems to fall flat, I can perceive the learning process in progress or learning in progress. So again, they're trying to figure out, how do I teach off of the students rather than at them, and how do I engage with them on a level in which I'm connected with them. And making the content accessible, this is easier said than done. Obviously, as I said, there's no assignment, there's no lesson plan. The student just basically comes in with a paper and they have to open up the conversation. And Trevor says, I felt kind of embarrassed because I didn't know how to open our conversation. After this meeting, I found I needed to pay more attention to arouse his interest and make him concentrate on our meeting. So again, he's trying to make the content accessible and connect with this tutee. And Dina says, just does not, the student of the tutee, sorry, doesn't know how to use an outline to help her to think. I don't know what I can help her on this. If she strays from the point, it can be a problem, but I don't have a solution. I feel bad because I don't know how to help her. So again, you've got a lot of emotion coming out here, and you've got a lot of struggling with, how do I connect with this person? How do I connect with the content that they have? Now, these excerpts come from the supervisor. So this is the instructor of the tutoring internship. And you can see the kinds of things that the instructor is trying to do. So she's saying, not every tutee is very talkative. Maybe you can try using statements. It might be easier for her to react to a statement rather than formulating a question. And she even gives an example here. She says, if you say, I don't see any transitions between paragraph 1 and paragraph 2, and then wait for her to respond, she doesn't feel like she has to come up with an answer. She can just comment and try that, see if that works. So again, there's a lot of really directed mediation that's really focused on what the pre-service teacher is struggling with. For be direct, not directive, in Dina's, she says, I can see why you want to build your tutee's confidence, self-confidence. It may be that just praising a student is not that useful. It might be better to find a specific point in the text that you think is strong and point out why it is strong. That way the praise is connected to a clear achievement on her part. So again, this is this notion of be direct, but don't tell them how to do it. Find something in their text that's really good and tell them why, and that will help them see how their writing is improving. And then teaching is connecting. Sage says it seems that this is who she already is, and that is a huge part of teaching. Recognize who and where your students actually are. So again, it's connecting with who your students are. Again, in the later reflections, you see them shifting their identity. So here, my job is to help students to gain self-confidence rather than telling them what to do. For Sage, I'm trying to answer differently or bounce the question back to her so that it's more dialogic. Trevor says, my tutee told me that the most she gained from our meeting sessions is the ideas of her writing. So again, these are some shifts you start to see in their identities, how they position themselves as tutors. And then some final thoughts that it was just very clear that they really shifted towards thinking about their reasoning and their awareness and their connection with their tutees. So Dina says, to sum up, tutoring experience teaching really introduces me to step into the ESL teaching world. I start to know the difficulties of ESL tutoring and teaching and also feel the joy of ESL teaching. Sage says, I learned 2 things. First, I don't have to pretend in order to feel or be qualified. And second, I was much more of an expert than I realized. So she's sort of coming to this awareness of how she really can be an effective tutor in an academic writing course. And Trevor says, by listening to the tutees, I can also know their concerns, their needs, their problems. Again, this is a real shift from how do I tell them what to do to what do they need and how can I give them more specific feedback. So now we're into the last course, which is the practicum, and this is the 15-week teaching experience. So they're placed in an ESL class. All 3 of these teachers ended up in an academic writing class. So you're going to see things that would typically take place in that class. There's a mentoring teacher, so the very experienced DSL teacher teaches the class. They do a reflective teaching journal. Sharon Childs does this a little bit differently than some teachers. She does what's called recall, reflect, and reimagine. So when they write their teaching journals, the first thing they do is they say, what happened? What happened in the class? And then they reflect on that. Why did that happen? And then they reimagine, what could I have done differently? Or if I do it next time, what will I do? And it's really made the reflective journals much more future-oriented rather than here's what I did and it worked, or here's what I did and it didn't work. It's sort of like, here's what I did, here's why I did it, here's why I think I could do it, how I think I could do it differently in the future. Sharon does observations with all the teachers, so I think she observes them 3 times. You're going to see in a minute some video clips of them actually teaching. They also do stimulated recalls where they watch the video together and they talk about what worked and what didn't work and how they can improve in the future. They have a final reflection paper. I'm going to show you some examples of that. And they also read a teaching philosophy, which is a requirement of our MA program. So this is the structured mediational space of the practicum experience. So I'm going to actually now talk about each teacher individually. So we're going to go through Dina, and then we're going to watch Dina teach. Then we're going to go through Sage and watch Sage teach. And then I'm going to go through Trevor and watch him teach. So in Dina's case, this teaching as connecting was really important to her. Now writing my reflection, I keep asking myself why I just left and didn't give suggestions. So this is at the beginning of the semester, week 2. I regard myself as an outsider of the class, an observer, an MA student trying to do her practicum. So she's really feeling uncomfortable in the beginning of not knowing how she sort of fits into this group and not knowing how to connect with them. That's really the important thing. By week 4, she says, she starts to talk about how they're going to teach off the students rather than at them. So based on our students' previous understandings, we decided to change some of our lesson plans. So she's really focusing now more on how the students are understanding what they're doing and then changing future lesson plans so that the students know what's going on. Doesn't look like my slides are forwarding here. Can somebody just check on that? Yeah, that looks like, are we stuck again?
Karen, you are, it says Dina on top of the slide. We have Dina,
we're stuck.
and then week 10.
That's good. Yeah, okay, you're with me now. Great, yeah. Super. Okay. So we're at week 10 here. Teach off your students, not at them. So here again, she's starting to again think more about how to engage with the students. They happen to be teaching reporting verbs. And she says, according to and state are the most common verbs in these summaries based on the situation. We think that's essential to use reporting verbs in the whole class, but do it in a different way. So again, they tried something with the students, it didn't really work, and now they're going to teach off them rather than at them. By week 11, she's saying teaching as connecting. The process I went through for preparing the class helped me to illustrate that as a teacher, have to help students to link the previous class content to the present content and prepare them for the upcoming new class content. So we're getting this connecting from here's what I taught to the next thing that we're going to do to the next thing that we're going to do. Okay, so now I'm going to show you a short video of Dina teaching, and she's teaching. Is the video coming up? I don't see it on the screen there. Okay, if you can advance the screen. I seem to be behind here. Let me try again. Okay, I don't see the video coming up on the screen. We're still stuck here on the
yeah, the video is a bit slow. Video.
Okay.
It seems like it seems stuck at the moment.
There it is. Okay, now I see it. Okay, so in this video, Dina is teaching what's called the problem solution essay. It's basically an argumentative essay. They come up with a problem. They have to find solutions using citations and other resources, and then they have to say what the solution would be. And what she's doing here, she's just done a small group discussion where the students have talked about the way they're going to critique their solutions. And she's gone around the room and she's listened to what the students have said. And she's kind of reporting back to them what she heard from the small groups. And then she asks the students to give her other ideas. And so it's leading a large group discussion, but she's using what she learned from listening into the small groups to engage with them as a large group. And one of the things you'll also notice about this particular video is that one of the things we really work hard with teachers is to increase their wait time. Typically, they don't wait. They ask a question and then they just go right on. And you'll see Dina here, even physically struggling to hold her wait time. And she gets participation by doing that. So I'll just play this clip and hopefully it will work. Whoops. There we go.
I heard several great questions you can use to teach your own solutions. I heard just take from Google and see which counter scholar gives some kind of counter opinions, and you will use it as a weakness of your first and second solution. And another one is come back to the source you propose a solution. Like Lydia said, she found a program from a website, and she actually thinks this solution is kind of time costing. And she's come back to the website and to collect data to prove that this program is time costing. And other thoughts?
You could just use your own logical reasoning to find the root cause solutions. But since they are the range, so our opinion doesn't our opinion doesn't have to be right all the time. So we can just provide some research based on our opinion.
Yeah,
that's something they value about.
Yeah, as far as cash, we cannot just only use our opinion. Only rely on our opinion. Because I don't like this, so it doesn't work. You have to provide some evidence to support your opinion. Okay. And
okay, it's not clear to me that the video played for you. I hope it did. But in essence, what she's doing here, she's attempting to take her students' ideas, connect them to what she's trying to teach, and make them relevant to them. So when a student says something, she picks up on that, she takes it and she connects it to what she's trying to teach here with the problem solution essay. So she's still a novice teacher, but she's clearly trying to teach more dialogically, engage with the students and get them to use, to contribute to the conversation of what they're having at this moment. Okay, I'm gonna go forward here now with Sage, although I don't see the slide advancing. I'll wait just a second and see if that comes up.
Karen, we can see the slide. We can see
Can you see it? It's
yes.
Okay, great. Maybe it's just my what I'm seeing. It's not showing it. Okay, so for Sage, again in week 2, she says I'm figuring out how to explain those ideas in my own words, making connections between different concepts, thinking about how best to communicate to all the students. So again, teaching as connecting is again becoming something that is really prevalent in her reasoning and how she's thinking. By week 6, she says, my mentor said I did a better job of situating the lesson in the context of the course and the compare contrast essay assignment. But the smaller transitions, like between the 2 parts of the activity, I still think I could do more. So she's really cognizant of what's working and what's not working and how she can really be more productive or better at making transitions between different activities. In week 6, she's talking again about this be direct, not directive. Basically, we could just lecture to the students on how to do a good presentation, but that would be boring. Instead, we had them get into groups, and each group had to make a list of do's and don'ts for a particular aspect of the presentation. This way, the students are making use of things they maybe already know. So again, it's trying to be direct, but not tell them how to do it, to have the students kind of come up with it themselves. And then teaching is connecting at week 8, Sage says, I try to shy away from sensitive conversations, especially in the context where they don't feel natural, or at least not typical, like in a classroom. In the future, I want to get creative in my lesson planning and try to leave space for creative space for significant conversations to happen in the classroom. So again, it's connecting to the students in meaningful and real ways, not sort of fake, typical classroom ways. So here is Sage, and she is teaching, again, this is a freshman composition course, so it's academic writing. She is, this particular lesson, they're talking about how do you paraphrase citations or sources that you're using in your paper, and how do you do in-text citations, which is also something that not only international students need to learn how to do, but American students need to learn how to do this as well. So you can see how she gets the students to sort of talk about, she's given them a text to look at, and she's asked them, have they done paraphrasing in an appropriate way? Have they done in-text citations in an appropriate way? Okay, so I'm going to play this for you. Hopefully you can see it.
What are the issues with that? There's no in-text citation, and there is a sentence that's exactly the same, and there are no quotation marks. Okay. Any other? We talked about how it's kind of hard if you have something with a lot of scientific kind of writing or a lot of numbers. It's really hard to paraphrase because you feel like I need this term, I need these numbers. So you said there's no quotation marks. So that could be some options for different.
It's maintain my quotation with some marks. Like some research shows on. I can put a quotation mark and a sentence in the same way. I'll just paraphrase and put a particle and put it in there.
I like that you connected it to the rest of the page. You said, someone said this, and you kind of explain the result, and then you say, here's your number. So you're not just giving the facts, you're also connecting it. Okay. Any other?
Okay, so you see her there really trying to teach off the students rather than at them. She's trying to get, okay, so what did you see in this text that I gave you? Was that a good paraphrase? Was it a good text citation? They discovered something. She then uses that. The student gives her, she asks them, well, what could you do? And the student gives her an idea. So you get a much more dialogic, more interactive kind of engagement that's happening in the classroom. And then lastly, Trevor, this notion of be direct, not directive. He says in week 2, the students felt confused at the very beginning about why they have to do this activity. So, you know, he's realizing that I need to really be direct with them rather than, you know, telling them what to do. Teach off your students at them. He says, this is week 5, when I conducted my instruction, I was aware of some of my students were frowning or blankly staring at me. So he's, again, focusing more on his students than himself. I knew there must be something unclear to them, therefore I chose to explain my directions again in a longer version. However, I found that the repetition of direction might not be an effective way. So he's really expressing his reasoning and how he's coming to terms with what's happening in the class. Week 12, he says, I need to keep working on polishing my teacher talk, trying to achieve the teaching goals with more concise language. In addition, I need to pay more attention to the design of my activities. I have to consider how engaged with students in activity, how to make them actively learn. So again, he's articulating his reasoning and what he's really trying to struggle with, and he's really trying to be much more interactive and much more dialogic and really focusing on the students. Week 13, teach off your students at them. He had a kind of a blip in the later part of his practicum where he sort of fell back into that teacher-fronted instruction style, and he thought he had sort of overcome that. And in this particular reflective journal, he says, it's like the nightmare of figuring out how to lead a group discussion flood back again. At this stage of the semester, I thought I had made great progress on leading group discussions for in-class activities. However, when I led this peer review conference, I found that there were some other factors coming into play, influencing the progression of the discussion. So he's realizing his shift and how he's trying to lead a group discussion that is much more dialogic and interactive, and recognizing that it's still hard for him to do that, which is typical of a pre-service teacher. And so this is the video of Trevor teaching. And again, he's also in a freshman composition course. The topic they were focusing on that particular week had to do with argumentation and ethos, pathos, and logos. I'm sure you're all familiar with that triangle. He had given the students a text to look at, and then he asked them to identify sentences in the text that were evidence of ethos, pathos, and logos. And you can see here how he's much more interactive and dialogic with his students than we saw in the very first video.
Adds to the credibility of what he's talking about.
Yes, that's all the ethos, because Obama is a very powerful person. You kind of agree with his solution, so that can be an ethos, right? So cool. So we have very abundant evidence for ethos. So can you find some other evidence for like pathos? Yes, pathos. I think it's a little bit hard to find evidence for pathos. So that on the first page means the big paragraph. They want to also help government find whether there's a better economic model, not just they can get not efficient, they can support yes, trying to put that problem on the audience. An audience, so that audience should think of this problem, right? So it is not that far. It is supposed to be like, right?
Again, you see him asking the students to contribute, taking what the students are saying, using it in some substantive way to connect it to the concepts that he's trying to teach. So, you know, again, I'll just, as a sort of a concluding remark about these three teachers, they're still pre-service teachers. They're still new at this, but they have come such a long way than what we saw sort of in the beginning of really not knowing how to put a lesson together, not knowing how to connect with students, not knowing how to teach off students at them. Think of those two images I showed you at the beginning of my talk of the teacher-fronted instruction versus the more dialogic mediation. So these are just clips from their teaching philosophy. And so you can see what Dina writes about it, you know, is I want students to actively participate rather than passively learn. So again, that's our goal and what we're trying to enable them to be able to accomplish. I must create a safe environment that is interactive and collaborative and promotes problem solving and critical thinking skills. Again, you know, engaging them, but not telling them, being direct, but not directive. And then, of course, saying, you know, being a qualified teacher is to help students to connect knowledge to their life. So that's really that notion of teaching as connecting. For Sage, you know, she recognizes that, you know, her role is to help them identify and make use of the wealth of their linguistic and cultural resources from their first language as they're becoming proficient in English. So it's not to teach at them, it's to teach off them. Take what they can give her and use that as a way to connect with and learn about what they're studying in the class. For Be Direct, Not Directive, she says, to try to impose a predetermined method on each setting cannot meet students' needs. Rather, I listen, reflect, and adapt during the teaching process. So you can see how she's really shifted in her philosophy. The teaching is connecting, developing quality connections depends on creating a space in which students are central and are encouraged to take risks and grow from mistakes. This requires community. Students and teachers are progressively building relationships. So the connection there, making connections, has become more central to her philosophy of teaching. And then finally, Trevor, I believe that the ESL teacher and ESL learner should be in the midst of a reciprocal relationship. I love his English. ESL teaching is by no means a unidirectional transmission of knowledge from teachers to learners. So really understanding you have to teach off students rather than at them. In terms of Be Direct, Not Directive, I believe that if effective instruction and interaction in ESL classroom affords students the opportunity to play with, think of and even critique language through diverse in-class activities. And then finally, I believe that ESL teaching can be intentional as well as purposeful and meaningful. When I have the knowledge of my students, when I know who my students are, I'm better able to constantly adapt my teaching designs to meet their needs. So it's much more focused on connecting with students as his philosophy of teaching. So in looking at our praxis-oriented pedagogy, I know I gave you a lot of text there to look at. I'm not sure all the videos showed, so I'm not sure how effective that was. But we look at the first course, the Teaching ESL course, as what we call words into action. So this is where they practice teaching, but it's not, it is real in when they do the actual teach, but there's a lot of mediation. And all of the mediation in the first course takes place in activity. It happens in the moment when they're teaching, or after they've taught, looking at themselves on video. In the internship, the tutoring internship, we talk about this as action to reasoning. So I'm doing this tutoring and I'm having to reason about it. And the mediation that comes from the instructor is more mediation on the activity. So it's after the fact, here's what you've done, here's some ideas of what you can do. And in the practicum, we talk about reasoning to action. And this is really where the practice comes in, because it's mediation that's in, on, and for activity. It's sort of, you're now in the actual activity of having to teach, and we're giving you all kinds of mediation that is both in the action of doing it and on it and for the activity of teaching. So we've kind of looked at praxis-oriented pedagogy as this transition, and as Malva said at the beginning, as transformative, because we can now see that the principles of the Vygotsky and sociocultural principles that these structured mediational spaces are set up on are having consequences for these teachers. And they're able to reason about their practices, and they're able to realize what they need to do, and they're able to internalize that in a way in which they can be more self-directed rather than having someone tell them what to do. And again, as I said, they're still novice teachers, but they've come a long way. And for us, just as the project that Mal was working on with her teachers, it's really made us feel like our teaching education practices matter. And by studying them, we have become so aware of why they matter and the consequences that they have for our student teachers. So there I will leave it and open it up to questions. I think there's a panel that's supposed to follow me with some questions or some
Karen,
dialogue.
Yes.
But
thank you very much, Karen, for your inspiring presentation. Thank you very much. Well, your work has definitely opened new avenues for research and practice in elder teacher education. To delve deeper into the implications of your findings, we have assembled a distinguished panel of professors. So joining us for the panel, we have Professor Malva Barahona. She's an associate professor in the Faculty of Education at Universidad Católica de Chile. Her research interests focus on second language teacher education, and her work draws on social cultural perspectives and cultural historical activity theory. She has undertaken research on EFL teachers' beliefs, practice-based approaches, teachers' learning, teacher identity, teachers' agency, autoethnography, decoloniality, affordances in language learning policies, and the use of emerging technologies in foreign language learning and teaching. And let's also welcome Professor Stephen Darwin. He's an associate professor of education based in the Faculty of Education at Universidad Alberto Hurtado. In addition to teaching research skills and supervising students' research, he undertakes research related to EFL teacher education as well as in higher education on issues related to the effect of academic practices, of students' evaluation, global rankings, and quality assurance regimes. Please welcome all the panelists. And me.
And you. Yes. You should give yourself an introduction.
All right, yes.
So this is the time where we should talk a bit and have a bit of a dialogue with some questions, comments, and of course we have Karen still that we can ask questions to her directly, and of course something else, or you want to share some of your experiences.
Yeah, we're going to start with a question that is coming from the remote audience.
Yep.
Hello, remote audience.
Yes, so hello everybody there.
The YouTubers.
We have Magdalena Miller Araya.
Yep.
She says, thank you for sharing this teaching experience in detail. I think this is for Karen, and with like plenty of examples. So this is the question. How were the students' experiences connected across the 3 courses? Karen, I think this is for you. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that there's sort of a building of shifting from being helped and other directed, meaning getting a lot of assistance and a lot of support and taking sort of baby steps in the beginning, where then they get a little bit more independent and then they get much more independent. What I would say travels across the courses is those pedagogical concepts. They keep coming up over and over, this notion of teaching. Now, they don't say I'm teaching off my students, not at them, but that's what they mean. And we use those all the time in our practice. So they're aware that this is the instructional stance that we want them to take. And again, one of the reasons we took this project on was we really wanted to see what were the connections that were happening across the 3 courses. And I think the pedagogical concepts sort of traveled really nicely. And in fact, in the book that we published, we interviewed 9 teachers who had graduated from our program and had gone on to teach in their home country. And all of them said things like, I teach off my students, not at them, or I know how to be direct and not directive. And they use those pedagogical concepts. So I would say that's probably what travels the most. One other thing I would say is that each of these courses is really oriented towards pedagogy, teaching, and how to teach, whereas they take a lot of other courses that are much more, they take a course on pronunciation, they take a course on grammar, they take a course on second language acquisition, they take a sociolinguistics course. Not all of those courses are very interesting and they learn a lot in those courses, but they're not focused on how to teach. And I think what travels across these three courses is that orientation of how do I learn to become a teacher? How do I learn to reason through my thinking? How do I actually engage in the activity of teaching? So that's how I would answer the connection between them.
Thank you, Karen. Well, I have received a couple of questions from the audience here in the auditorium. Please, Stephen, Malva, feel free to contribute. The first question is this. Have you noticed any meaningful differences between pre-service teachers who have been taught under the Praxis-Oriented approach and those who weren't?
Well, look, this is probably a good time to bring in some of the work we've been doing here in Chile, working across teacher education programs, EFL teacher education programs in our case. And some of our early work in this project really made us think a lot about the role of teacher educators. As Melba said at the beginning, we were focused primarily on pre-service teacher learning and their professional responsibility. But as we began to look at that, we thought, first off, let's look at the levels of responsibility that teacher educators felt for different elements of the learning process of pre-service teachers. And what we saw was quite a divide across programs. So we had 17, I forget exactly how, a large number of programs across Chile, but we saw a consistency, and there was a gap between responsibility felt for sort of practice-based work. There was a sort of a high level of responsibility felt for the practice elements of teaching, but quite a lesser responsibility for 2 other elements, for the sort of theoretical, the less practical, the more complex areas of underpinning theory. And secondly, for learning English. A fairly low response. If they don't learn English, they don't learn English. So it was an interesting divide we saw between sort of practice orientation and these other dimensions of the teaching process. That led us to the second stage of the research that Melba commented on today, which was actually go and observe classrooms and actually look at what teachers were doing in the classroom with pre-service teachers in these different dimensions. That led to us seeing, well, this happens because there's a lot of conflicting pressures on teacher educators. Teacher educators have different forces. They have what universities expect of them to teach, a crowded curriculum, standards of for program accreditation, what schools are actually doing. And in Chile, we know schools are very different. There's not one sort of practice-based environment. So different teacher educators were having to think about very complex pressures. So the reason we saw that divide as developing was because these teachers are facing really a lot of conflicting pressures. And this, for teacher educators in our context, is really problematic. It's a very complex task. So we see that as for the next stage of the research, thinking through what effect that then has on pre-service teachers and what they then do in the school, in the practicum process, and then, of course, as prospective teachers of English in Chile after the program is over.
I wanted to share that when you do when in the teacher education programs, you support student teachers and you actually create, I'm talking as a teacher educator, and you create these mediational environments in which you actually help them not only be effective teachers, so that's to say implement different practices, but also help them reason what to use and how to use and what to do, what to do and why to do something in specific context. That changes kind of the teaching, not the teaching of the next lesson, kind of for life, I would say, and this is kind of a big call, but because what they do, when we supervise practicum or even in a simulation class, they would do according to a rubric. We give them a rubric. We tell them what to do. Good students, of course, they would deliver, they would do accordingly. However, what happens when they don't have the rubric? When they don't have kind of they don't have to respond to you, but actually they have to respond to students' learning. And that's the difference. Yeah? When we provide that mediational space in which we actually help them to get there, kind of it's not just responding to me, it's responding also to themselves. And not to themselves just because, but to the students' learning. What is it that, why is, and of course the context and all what happens. So, yeah, I think, thank you.
Thank you. Something that calls my attention, and this is like my question, is this idea of the pedagogy of the teacher educator. Because I believe it's not so simple to get to students' reasoning or to make that reasoning transparent. What skills do we as teacher educators or future teacher educators need to work on?
Maybe Karen can start with that.
Well, I have to, I certainly can respond to that. I have to say that if you study yourself, which I do, you really learn how to do this well. And it's really from collecting data over the years of what's happening to my teachers and how I am responding to them. I'm not just looking at their reasoning and their learning. I'm also looking at what I'm doing. And I have cringe moments where, I probably could have done something differently or better. But I think that idea of this self-reflection on your actual activities and why you're doing what you're doing is not only just important for teachers, but it's really important for teacher educators. And in a book I did a few years ago with my colleague, Paul Gallenbeck, that's basically what we did. We looked at our own practices as teacher educators and through a microscope and sort of analyzed what we were doing and how we were mediating. And it made us much better mediators in the long run. So I think the project that Alba, you're working on, or Malba, sorry, that you're working on with your teachers and that went into the chapter is a perfect example of that, of looking at what am I being challenged with right now? How do I think about creating some sort of innovative way of addressing that? And then studying it to see what happened to me. How did I reason through that or think through that? And what is that? How does that affect me, as Malva just said, for my life, not just for the next lesson that I teach? So again, and I in my bio, I mean, one of the things that I think is really important is engaging in the activity of narrating. Narration and narrative activity is it's a way to ignite these cognitive processes that will help teachers and teacher educators make their reasoning transparent. not only for whoever is looking at them, but for themselves.
I was also thinking, I agree with Karen, and actually, I definitely agree that teacher educators, to improve their practice or to start becoming aware of the practices, we have to actually study what we do in the class. I mean, and not once, many times, and we have to innovate. And this is one of the tensions we have found in the recent research. A lot of tension because teacher education in Chile is quite prescribed. Yeah, we've got lots of things to do. They have to be done. We have to teach teachers in a very specific way because of the law, because of many reasons. So innovation has very little space. Very little space. I know that, and I'm quite aware. So how do we find those little spaces? And that's the thing. When we study what we do, there we notice, oh, actually, I do this because I'm told this, this, and this. Okay, but maybe here there is a bit of room. If I study, I can tell that. If I don't do that, I can continue doing it. I mean, teach teachers thinking that I do a good job, but just thinking, speculating, not really actually knowing without much evidence. Also something I know, and this is again not only specific from Chile, but internationally as well, is how is it that we become teacher educators? Yeah? Daniela, her work has a lot to do with that, yeah? And she has found that actually teacher educators become, I'm going to say, out of an accident, yeah? Like, well, I was offered a job, I started supervising the practicum, and then I started doing a course. I was not trained to be a teacher educator, yeah? Or some others who have studied, then who have been academically achievers, like doing MA, doing PhDs, and then that's how they get into teacher education. They never, again, dreamed of being teacher educator. Yeah? They dreamed of being an academic, not of teacher educator. So, well, Daniela can tell you a bit about that, about kind of that work. But that also, that tells us something. Kind of, okay, out of an accident, out of another type of trajectory, and then we end up, what is it that I'm doing? Anyway.
And just to further extend that point in this research, we've also seen a lot of anxiety about teacher-educator working conditions. The working conditions often are very precarious, the contracts are difficult, hours are limited, which can often mean the sort of time for innovation, for thinking, for reflection is also very limited. And that really restricts the ability to take these sort of developmental initiatives. So often it's a kind of a voluntary act rather than one that's funded by an employer as part of it being a teacher educator, which we also tried to highlight in this work because it came through fairly strongly, as you would not be surprised. Many of you in the room, I'm sure, it's them.
Yes. Do we have any more questions from the audience, please?
Well, this was a research. How did you collect the data of, which was the methodology?
Well, we have done different things because we have done surveys, we have done interviews, but then we have also done observations from classrooms, university classrooms, in which we have observed what teacher educators do.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Oh, Claudia has another one from the audience from YouTube. I think it's...
Should I read it?
Yeah, please.
Here's a question. What are the implications of practice-based teacher educations in novice educators' experiences when joining the workforce? I'm going to read it again.
Yes, please. Yeah.
What are the implications of practice-based teacher education in novice educators' experiences when joining the workforce?
Yeah, I can respond to that one. Because one of the things we did for this project, this book project, Praxis-Oriented Pedagogy, was we followed up with 9 teachers who had graduated from the program and had actually given us permission to use their data. So what we did with them was we picked out excerpts from their work when they were in the MA program, either from their reflective journal or from their philosophy or from something. And we gave it to them and we said, now that you're in the field, now that you're a teacher in China or Argentina or wherever you're from, what do these moments mean to you? And we asked them to sort of reflect on that. And a lot of them really said that, you know, they now understand the constraints that they're working in their home country in the way that they didn't before. And they realize that they can reason through some of these things in the way in which we taught them or helped them learn to reason in the MA program. So one of the teachers that we interviewed was teaching back in Saudi Arabia, and this was during COVID, and so she was teaching online, and it was very frustrating, and she couldn't get the students to participate, and she was really struggling. Like thinking back to, how do I teach off my students, not at them? And she sort of walked through her reasoning for how she was dealing with this constraint that she was experiencing in her home country. So I think I would go back to, if you really change, this is the transformative part of Vygotsky's theory, if you fundamentally change the way teachers think about what they do and think about how they teach, that is a life trajectory for them, and they can use that wherever they go. That doesn't mean they're going to solve all the problems that they experience, but it does give them a sense of, I have agency, that I can work through whatever is really troubling me. And maybe they do it with colleagues, or maybe they do it on their own, but they have that sense of, I can work around this. I can deal with this. I can think of ways to deal with it, rather than just, oh, this is the way we teach in Saudi Arabia, so I can't do anything about it. And we found that to be a real strong theme in all 9 teachers that we interviewed for that project.
Wow. Very powerful, very interesting. Well, I don't think we have any more questions. Mm-hmm. So before we conclude, we'd like to thank our esteemed presenters, Professor Karen Johnson, for sharing her valuable research with us. Your work has undoubtedly enriched our understanding of novice L2 teachers' reasoning. We would also like to thank Professors Malva Barahona and Stephen Darwin for joining us in the panel today. And thank you to all of you in the audience here for your active participation, and also the audience that has been watching us on YouTube, for your questions and your engagement. It has made this conference more enriching and joyful as well. Mm-hmm. Thank you, all of you, once again, and I hope you have a pleasant rest of the day. Let us continue the conversation and explore new ideas in the coffee break that we have arranged for us. Unfortunately, just the ones that attended face to face. No
remote coffee.
Just outside the auditorium. Thank you very much, and thank you to the audience that joined us through via YouTube.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Thank you, Karen.
Thank you,
Karen.
Thank
you.
you.
It was lovely.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much. I do hope in the future that I can come to Santiago and meet your teachers and students and be part of your program. And I'm so sorry that it didn't work out this time, but the gods were against us. We just, couldn't get there.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Bye.
Bye.